The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
The Democratic National Convention wrapped up in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania yesterday, and my sense going into Hillary Clinton's speech, the final event of this convention, was, what could she possibly do? What could Hillary Clinton possibly do in that speech to convince disaffected Bernie Sanders supporters to vote for her? What could she possibly do to reframe this entire election, something that I felt was desperately needed, especially in the wake of the fear-mongering Republican National Convention the week before? And I have to tell you, even if you don't like Hillary Clinton, her DNC speech was damn good. And I think it was very smart, Lewis, at the very beginning, just a few minutes in fact. She spoke directly to Bernie Sanders supporters. Now this, I'm going to play it for you. Maybe this didn't convince you, but the placement of this at the beginning of her speech, clearly making it something she wanted to address right away, was smart, and I believe was effective, at least to some degree. Let's take a look.
I want to thank Bernie Sanders. Bernie, your campaign inspired millions of Americans, particularly the young people who threw their hearts and souls into our primary. You've put economic and social justice issues front and center where they belong. And to all of your supporters here and around the country, I want you to know, I've heard you. Your cause is our cause. Our country needs your ideas, energy, and passion. That is the only way we can turn our progressive platform into real change for America.
This is about as well as it could have gone, right? I mean, Hillary Clinton wasn't going to get up there and say, hey, you know what, Bernie supporters? I've heard you, and I'm going to relinquish the nomination and give it to Bernie Sanders. I mean, I don't know what you could have expected. She acknowledged Bernie supporters. She said economic and social justice issues are important issues that he raised. She told supporters that she is also working for them. Now, you might not believe it. You might not think it's genuine or sincere, but the placement of it right up front and the way in which this was approached was, given what she could do during this speech, Lewis, absolutely the right way to go about it.
Yeah, it had to be done. It had to be mentioned, and Bernie doesn't look too happy. If you watch a video, you'll see that. But that's separate. I don't think she's going to convince many Bernie supporters with the placement of this or with the speech in general.
Well, remember, most of them have already been convinced. As we know, most will be voting for her.
The majority will probably end up voting for her, yes. I'm talking about those that
remain
are
unconvinced, yeah.
Yeah, that remain unconvinced. But anyway, it was well done. It was the best she could do.
Another really smart thing Hillary Clinton did was critiquing Donald Trump's ideas without doing the personal attacks throughout. For example, she talked about terror, and she exuded definitive strength, which was something Republicans had been criticizing the Democratic National Convention for. She then went on to talk about how things will be paid for, and she made a contrast between her experience and Donald Trump's by talking about gridlock in Washington, and then went into the so-called businessman credentials and how that relates to being a good president. Let's take a look at a little bit of that.
Now I imagine that some of you are sitting at home thinking, well, that all sounds pretty good, but how are you going to get it done? How are you going to break through the gridlock in Washington? Well, look at my record. I've worked across the aisle to pass laws and treaties and to launch new programs that help millions of people. And if you give me the chance, that's exactly what I'll do as president. But then I also imagine people are thinking out there, but Trump, he's a businessman. He must know something about the economy. Well, let's take a close look, shall we? In Atlantic City, 60 miles from here, you will find contractors and small businesses who lost everything because Donald Trump refused to pay his bills. Now remember what the president said last night. Don't boo, vote. But think of this. People who did the work and needed the money, not because he couldn't pay them, but because he wouldn't pay them. He just stiffed them. And you know that sales pitch he's making to the president? Put your faith in him and you'll win big. That's the same sales pitch he made to all those small businesses. Then Trump walked away and left working people holding the bag.
There was no comparison between these two conventions, and this is not an analysis of the merits of the DNC versus the RNC. You know, this week has been maybe the week I've been most critical of the DNC in the history of the show. This is an analysis of the conventions, and when you look at Donald Trump's speech last Thursday and Hillary Clinton's speech last night, no comparison. And on the issue of fear, both using fear, but think about the differences. Trump's message, and that from Republicans, Lewis, was the fear of how terrible things are now, the fear of how scary terrorism is, especially because Democrats won't fix it, job security, crime is so scary, the U.S. is in decline, the borders are unprotected. Democrats also using fear this week, arguing actually the fear shouldn't be that things are bad now. Things are actually statistically, empirically pretty good. The scary thing would be if Trump becomes president, both using fear in different ways.
Yeah, completely different at the same time. It's so easy to take down Trump and to criticize Trump without the ad hominem attacks and without the personal attacks. There's just such a wealth of material.
Yeah.
And Trump still seems kind of bitter when he's trying to attack Hillary and trying to make it a bit more personal. This was well done by Hillary.
Let's talk about some Republicans who watched the DNC this week and recognized it was not a particularly good DNC for the GOP. I have so many tweets I'm going to be showing you here, and many Republicans realizing, wait a second, we had this ridiculous convention last week in Cleveland. We had the plagiarism scandal. We had Ted Cruz coming out and saying everything short of don't vote for Donald Trump. You had Trump giving this dark, apocalyptic vision of America and saying, I will fix everything myself personally, which, as Hillary Clinton pointed out last night, is ridiculous. And a number of conservatives recognize this. We'll start with conservative writer Ron Fournier, who said, well done, Donald Trump. You made Democrats a party of sunny patriotism and values. You sure Bill Clinton didn't ask you to run? National Review editor Jonah Goldberg. No, we don't have that one. We have John Podhoretz, former Ronald Reagan speechwriter, saying, take about 5 paragraphs out of that Obama speech, and it could have been a Reagan speech. Trust me, I know. Next, we have Fox News host Greg Gutfeld. If Republicans had championed their principles with specifics rather than embrace autocracy, they wouldn't have yielded this turf to Democrats. We then heard from conservative blogger Eric Erickson saying, for Republicans who are not social conservatives, I have to imagine last night and tonight at the DNC are having an impact on them. And then conservative Iowa radio host Steve Deese saying, so most of conservative media and the GOP spent the week rooting for Russia, and now the Democrats get to rally around the flag. Dreadful. We also heard from Rich Galen, former press secretary for Dick Cheney, none other than the dark overlord, saying, how can it be that I am standing at my kitchen counter sobbing because of the messages being driven at the DNC? Where has the GOP gone? And lastly, Matt McCowiak, a conservative operations veteran, saying this Democratic convention has been an unmitigated disaster for the GOP. Very well produced, unifying, patriotic, bravo. We didn't exactly have Democrats talking about how that they had been really swayed by the RNC last week, did we, Lewis?
Not at all. No, it was, I wouldn't call it a production disaster. I mean, it's not like you were watching this thing and it just looked like it was thrown together in 5 minutes. But the overall feeling was completely different, yes.
And we'll see how that translates to the polls. Next week, we will start to get post-convention polling where we will be able to see, okay, now that Trump has had his say and now that Hillary Clinton has had her say, what is the impact on the polls? And soon we'll start putting together those electoral maps and seeing what are the scenarios as they shape up, as we are already getting towards the end of summer. Amazingly, we are getting towards the end of summer and very, very close to this election. We have a great show for you today. We are going to be taking calls. We are going to be answering your questions. And of course, you can sign up for membership and support this type of show. This is really important as we get closer and closer to the election. Vote with your dollars and support independent media at davidpakman.com/membership.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new member of the day is Scott Blair. Scott Blair gets access to all of the members-only benefits, including, of course, the world-famous bonus show, the commercial-free audio and video feeds of the show, invitations to members-only town hall meetings. What else? It's so much stuff I can't even remember everything that's going on. You can sign up at davidpakman.com/membership, and a big thanks to Scott Blair, who is today's new member of the day. Of course, if you ever shop on Amazon.com, you can also support the work we do by first visiting davidpakman.com/Amazon, and then any shopping that you do will send us a little kickback, which is why not take a little bit of money away from Amazon and redirect it to the David Pakman Show. Let's take some calls, 617-830-4750. We're not pre-screening. We don't know who's on the line. We don't know what they're going to talk about. Let's start there. Who's talking to us and where are you calling from?
This is Glenn Brown in Tampa, Florida. I spoke with you last week, and you convinced me, since I'm in a swing state like Florida, to go ahead and vote for Hillary.
Right.
But in light of everything that's come up since I last called your show, you've done a great job going into it. So I'm not going to rehash it. But can you understand why there are potentially millions of us Sanders supporters, even with the risk of the boogeyman Trump hanging over our heads, why we really don't want to vote for Hillary? Can you understand where we're coming from?
Yeah, let's talk it through, Glenn. How old a guy are you?
I'm 52.
Okay, do you have kids?
I cannot have children. No, I do not have children.
Okay, do you have nieces or nephews?
Yes, I certainly do.
Okay, how old are they?
My nieces and nephews, they're 14 and 16.
Perfect, okay. In what way would they be better served 20 years from now if Donald Trump won in November? That, to me, is the fundamental question. Do you have an answer to that question?
No, I don't have an answer to that. All I can tell you is the counter argument the only counter argument I can make to what you're saying is, when I was watching the protest last night from the media center in Philly, one Sanders supporter said, and I'm sure you won't agree with it, but really it's the only one I can make. He said, I know a Trump presidency would be bad, but maybe that's what we need, to have really someone terrible like Donald Trump to finally wake this country up and bring about real dramatic change in this country, and the Democrats stop being corporatists and start governing as true progressives.
I think
so
that there is. I don't think that is a bad principle. The problem is, I don't see any way in which Donald Trump becoming the president would get us to that, particularly by appointing 3 to 4 Supreme Court justices for life. I mean, Rachel, I have no problem with the idea that Glenn is presenting. I just don't see how it would actually happen in a way where, oh, great, hey, Trump 4 years, it's terrible, and then it's progressive haven, you know?
Yeah, I think it would definitely derail those efforts. And I really like your argument about how would this serve the future generations and your kids and your nieces and nephews. I think it's a poignant one.
But long story short, Glenn, no, I don't criticize anyone who is feeling the frustration you're feeling. I'm just asking them to apply the thought process that you and I went through to sort of think about it. Thank you so much for the call, Glenn. I really appreciate it. Always great to hear from you.
I appreciate it, Jamil. Thank you. It's
All right.
a pleasure talking to you. Bye-bye.
We are taking calls 617-830-4750. Who's on the line with us?
It's Daniel. I'm out of Texas.
Daniel, did you say you're in Texas?
Uh-huh.
Okay, what's up? What can we do for you?
My question is, what are the main factors that you think led to having spread candidates like Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton? This is the first election where you've had two candidates that were so drastically disliked by the public.
Okay, I'm not sure. I don't know if you cut out or the volume was just low, but did you ask me for the key differences between the candidates? I'm sorry, I just didn't quite hear it.
No. The main reason that two disliked candidates like Trump and Clinton were accepted as major party nominees. Like,
how did it happen that two such disliked people ended up as the nominees? Well, I think the answer is different, Lewis, on the Republican side than on the Democratic side. I think on the Republican side, Donald Trump took advantage of sort of dormant authoritarianism, nativism, and the ability to coalesce low information voters with very simple language at a time when the Republican Party is in a sort of crisis state.
Add to that the celebrity factor.
And the celebrity factor. So I think that on the Republican side, that's why you're getting that. Very highly liked by those who support him, very strongly disliked by just about everybody else. On the Democratic side, I think the dynamics were different. You had someone who in 2008 went for it and didn't quite get it. And as we now know, was working together with the Democratic National Committee to essentially be crowned the nominee. When you have such an effort, wall-to-wall effort, by such major, we're talking about a major organization in the DNC and a lot of money, it led to that in spite of the fact that individually many people still don't like Hillary Clinton.
Yeah, the name, the money, the legacy, the friends in high places.
What do you think about it?
It seems like kind of a worst-case scenario for the ideology for both parties. Like, if they're both operated by sane people, it seems like it should work fine. You have conservatives and you have people who are probably a little more liberal. Well, in this case, you have complete authoritarian dictators, and you have bureaucracies that are so corrupt that they basically eat themselves alive. So it's rather interesting to me that both parties, seemingly at the same time, have ideologically just imploded.
Yeah, I mean, it's like in Hillary Clinton, you have a candidate who is far more to the right of much of the Democratic Party. And Donald Trump, you have a candidate who, sporadically is to the left and or right of many people in that party. There is a lot of confusion here. And, we're just still trying to make sense of it all. Thank you so much for the call. Really good question.
Hey, thanks for taking it. Have a good one.
All right. Take care. 617-830-4750. We're taking calls, and that's what's going on. I seem to be on some kind of speakerphone. Whoever I'm talking to, if you can take me off speaker and then tell us who this is, where you're calling from.
It's hard. I'm driving.
Okay.
Let me see if my speaker... Is this any better?
That's much better.
Is this better?
Yeah.
Oh. Yeah, it's better? Okay. David, this is David from Long Island, New York, and I have a question and a comment.
Please.
Question is, Lewis does the bonus show, right?
That's correct, yes.
Yes, and he's the host of the bonus show, right?
Sometimes Rachel will host stories. Lewis will often host stories. If I have a story, I will present it. But Lewis certainly is selecting most of the stories.
Right. Why does he not have his own introduction?
What you mean, like a different, like a musical introduction to the bonus? You're saying a musical introduction to the bonus show?
Well, yeah, the introduction says, it's the David Pakman show.
Right. I see what you're saying.
As opposed to the bonus show.
Yeah.
At the very least, the bonus show.
This is a very fair point, Rachel, I would say, right? I mean.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, we all agree. I will look into it. I mean, I really appreciate that. Maybe what we would do is I would introduce Lewis's presentation of the bonus show. Say, I am David Pakman. Let me now turn it over to Louis Motamedi for the bonus show or something like that.
Well, yeah. Well, it's kind of like the bonus show is still the David Pakman show.
It's the David Pakman Show bonus show, hosted by Louis Motamedi, co-hosted by Rachel Gordon, with David Pakman as the sidekick. But that's just like a 2-paragraph explanation.
But you have to sing it.
Right,
because
and then you'll have 2 minutes to do the stories.
Yeah, exactly. I'd be left with no time for the show. Fair question. We will discuss and follow up. I appreciate the call. And then what was your comment?
Okay. All right, the comment was about Bill Clinton's speech last night.
Right.
And Rachel Maddow had a comment about the first 30 minutes, talking about their marriage.
Yeah.
As if that's a negative. And I think the way he should have approached it was to say something to the effect of, like every couple, they had their ups and downs, but as opposed to the Republican nominee, he's not on his third or fourth wife.
Yeah, it's interesting what you're bringing up. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, the problem is
he
that
never divorced his wife while she was under cancer therapy.
Yeah, I think it would have been a little touchy to actually bring that up directly, but my sense, Rachel, is that the entire discussion of the marriage was sort of to humanize, and some commentary said feminize Hillary Clinton, and I think it was effective at both, actually.
I do, and I also think it was important how he was saying, okay, the Republicans have painted this picture of her as this caricature of herself, and she's not. She's a real person, and so I do think it was a humanizing agent in that sense, and I really don't think that part of the marriage, discussing that.
No, I agree, but I think that I believe that they should bring up the fact that they're still together.
Yeah.
All these other Republicans are multiple divorce.
Yeah.
And what's Christian values? What's family values?
No, it's a fair point.
Divorced,
fair point, and fair point, and astutely made. Thank you so much for making it. Thank you for the call. And I appreciate hearing from you. It's always great to take calls, Louis. We know that. 617-830-4750 is the number. I believe that we have time for one more call if we get it, and that's all, with peace and love, we're ready to take calls and the entire thing if it comes in. And I believe we do have a call. You are the last caller today. Who's on the line with us?
This is Josh from Boston, Massachusetts.
Josh, where in Boston are you?
I am down by the seaport.
Okay, on the downtown side or on the southeast side?
On the downtown side. I'm in Seaport. I'm in a building called Seaport West.
Well, you don't have to give us your address or anything. No. Yeah.
Skyline.
That's cool. So you're on the more, I guess you would say, highbrow side of the seaport. Okay. Now that we've established where you are.
Yes.
Now that we've established where you are, what can we answer for you today?
So I have a very, very important question. So I'm a lawyer. And in my practice, I work with a number of lawyers from Argentina.
Okay, I like it already.
My question is, when I I figured you might. When I refer to those lawyers in the third person, should I say, for instance, I spoke to Argentine counsel, or do I say I spoke to Argentinian counsel?
This may be the best question we've ever had on the show. Yeah, no, please, it would be my pleasure to answer this. I always use the term Argentinian, and there are basically two reasons why. One, Argentine feels very, very British to me, and I just don't, it doesn't feel like the word that strikes me as a sort of, I don't know, like it just seems to make more sense to me to say Argentinian. This is America, ladies and gentlemen, and this is how we talk in the United States. But also, in when you talk to Argentinians, or really anybody whose native language is Spanish, it's way easier to explain to them the word Argentinian than Argentine with a silent E at the end. So just in order to foster good communication between the Argentinian and American worlds, I prefer Argentinian, and I would strongly encourage you to do the same.
Well, this all makes good sense, David.
All right. Thank you so much. Appreciate the call.
Thanks. Bye.
All right. It's always great to hear from people. Lewis, huge success today in terms of phone calls.
Yeah, agreed. We got 4 good ones, and they were all substantive, and you got to answer a question about Argentina. What more could you ask for?
I feel, Rachel, like we should focus on quality over quantity, as long as we have enough quantity as far as calls go.
Agreed, but it's always fun when the trolls call.
Yeah, no, I know. And we've only had 2, I think I would say 2 adversarial calls so far, and I welcome it. To be clear, we're not screening calls or booting people if they're negative or anything like that. All right, we will take more calls next week. We'll take a break now.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Today's classic interview goes back to April of 2014. We recently had this statement from Reince Priebus, the head of the Republican National Committee, about how the policy, the platform of the Republicans is the best situation for children is one male parent and one female parent. And I talked to you about how many of those studies are really only actually discovering that 2 parents, generally speaking, leads to better outcomes than 1 parent, but that there actually is not any compelling evidence that 2 male parents are worse than a male parent and a female parent, et cetera, et cetera. I got a ton of emails. A lot of people hated it. A lot of people angry, et cetera. We're going to go back to this interview I did with Wendy Manning, who is a family demographer in the Sociology Department at Bowling Green State University. She completely debunked one of the primary cited studies which purports to demonstrate that gay parenting is a bad thing. I will say no more. It really needs no more introduction. We will go back to it and listen to what Wendy Manning had to say. We're speaking today with Wendy Manning. She's a family demographer in the Sociology Department at Bowling Green State University. She also co-directs the National Center for Family and Marriage Research. It's great to have you on. You know, we've been talking about the University of Texas at Austin sociologist Mark Regnerus, who has gained significant notoriety after publishing a journal article which claims that children of same-sex parents don't do as well, don't have that ideal outcomes in life, which was controversial because it ran contrary to many studies that preceded it. So let's start at the very beginning if we can. What was the basis and what were the parameters of this study that was done?
I think I wasn't part of the original study, so I can't speak to the motivations for why they did it, but I think their goal was to try to capture a wide range of family experiences and try to assess different indicators of well-being. And they wanted to capture a large sample was a goal of theirs. A lot of the prior work had been based on smaller samples, and so they wanted to contribute to the field by collecting a large sample that would be nationally representative.
So who did the study talk to? What were the questions that were asked, or how was data gathered about the families, about what determines whether a child is in a so-called same-sex household, and how is that all done?
So basically they talked to adults who were 18 to 39 years old and asked them about their family experiences. And that's a fairly traditional way to study family life and childhood family experiences. But rather than asking a question such as, have you ever lived with a is your parent lesbian or gay? They really asked if your parent had ever had a sexual or romantic relationship with someone of the same sex. And that, and to my knowledge, is the first time that approach has been used to determine the family circumstances of children. And as you can imagine, children aren't privy to all of their parents' sexual or romantic experiences. And so this is a sort of unusual way to capture children's living circumstances. And at the same time, he never really established in the first study whether the respondent had ever lived in this kind of family. He just said you were from a gay or lesbian parent family if your parent had had sex or a romantic relationship with someone of the same sex.
So let's talk a little bit about the numbers. We hear so much about this sample size of 3,000, and many of the advocates who say this study is absolutely accurate in saying that that children raised by same-sex parents don't do as well. But when you actually look at it, is it not true that all but 2 of those children came from households that were led by opposite-sex couples, if we are actually to look to break down those so-called 3,000 examples?
Well, I think I've heard a lot of different numbers thrown around, and the 2 is really a different number. I think the number that's, it seemed like maybe about 85 members of this sample had lived with a lesbian, had lived with their mother and her same-sex partner, so you might call that a lesbian mother family. It seems as if that is true. In his initial report that received a lot of publicity, he did not distinguish that, but then he was asked, there was a fair amount of critique of his study, and then he reanalyzed the data and came up with that. The 2 represent 2 children who were raised from birth until age 18 in a lesbian mother family. And so, and why that is important is that his contrast group are children who were raised in stable, married, different sex families. And so if you want to make similar comparisons, you can say, well, how do those kids fare compared to the 2 children who were raised in stable lesbian mother families? So that's where the 2 comes from.
So it would seem to me, and this is your area of expertise, not mine, so I ask this to you as an expert in this field.
Yeah.
If you were going to compare, if you want to really compare apples to apples, it would seem that you would need to compare the results of children raised until age 18, and from birth to age 18, in an opposite sex household with parents that are either have been together or separate the entire time, and the same circumstances from those in same-sex families, because otherwise I don't think you can really distinguish the effect of being in a same-sex household versus being in a household with divorced parents, which we know has an impact on development.
Right. I think your assessment is on target, and traditionally that's how we would do it. We would either look at children who were all from stable parent families, or we would include a variable in the analysis that indicated whether or not children had experienced the dissolution of their parents' relationship, or had been, we would have other indicators of family instability. And he seemed to really want to compare and make this firm contrast to the 2 biological stable parent families, but he didn't hold the same-sex families to the same standard, so it's hard to assess the findings. I mean, you also have to realize that a lot of children in same-sex parent families are the children of dissolved heterosexual relationships. So some children are adopted from birth. Some are adopted as preschoolers or even as adolescents into same-sex parent families. And then you have the children whose parents had maybe been together, biological parents are no longer together, but now they're being raised by a same-sex parent family. So there's a lot of pathways into same-sex parent families.
Right, that's the other issue. To say that you were raised in a same-sex household doesn't address whether one of those parents is the biological parent that was previously in an opposite sex relationship parenting that child, if the child was adopted into a family where neither of the parents is a biological parent. I think most of our audience understands the flaws with this. What I would be interested in hearing from you is that every week or every other week I get emails from those who are basically praying at the altar of Mark Regnerus when it comes to this study. And they tell me that the consensus from the sociological community is that this is a valid study that confirms it is worse for children to be raised in same-sex households. Where is that idea coming from? Is there any validity to that consensus in the sociological community?
There is, to my knowledge, no consensus. The American Sociological Association has prepared a brief, and I worked on that brief, and any researchers who study family, the sociology of family, and this is squarely where this work falls, do not agree with his assessment. We all have, there's always shortcomings with any research project, and as authors, we need to take responsibility for that and recognize the limitations. And in his own paper, he says that this paper cannot be used for the purposes that it has been used. He recognizes the flaws, but seems to be carrying forward anyway. So the consensus is not, and I would say using his own words from the study, he does not believe this study should be used to make policy about children in same-sex parent families.
So is it fair to say that the research, the importance of the research and the significance of the research is actually being taken by some even beyond where Mark Regnerus himself says the study should be used?
Yes, I agree. I mean, Mark Regnerus has made public statements. He's appeared in court cases. He was an expert witness in the Michigan case. So he seems to believe that his findings can be used for the purposes that the research community disagrees with, and in his own paper he says they shouldn't be used for. So I think he's taking his findings beyond the scope of the work and the data that's possible.
We've been speaking with Wendy Manning from the Sociology Department at Bowling Green State University, also co-director of the National Center for Family and Marriage Research. Really a pleasure having you on. Thank you for being here.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Let's take some questions today. We will start with John, who says, how do you differentiate trolls from legitimate hatriots? What I think they mean by a troll is someone who is pretending to write hate mail to be included in hatriot mail, but not actually someone who hates the show. I don't know how to interpret the question.
That or just comments on YouTube or wherever they come from. How do you differentiate between the people who are just there to inflame and insult and the people who hate you and hate your show and feel like they need to be heard?
Well, I'll talk about as far as email, and then maybe you can talk about as far as YouTube comments, since you deal more with those. With email, it's often very clear when someone is trolling rather than actually someone who hates the show. There are a few different signs. You just sort of learn over time. One of them is there are sometimes these comments about how the theme is, I'm gay, Lewis is gay, and we're in a relationship together, right? The way that is written is often completely over the top in a way that is obviously not believable. It's someone trolling and trying to get into hatriot mail. When other times it's sort of an aside and it's clear that it's not even really the main point of the critique. It's just sort of something they're throwing in because obviously being gay is bad. So you just sort of develop a sense. Sometimes the bad grammar that is included in the troll emails it's not so much that it's over the top, but it's just not believable, right? Hatriot bad grammar, legitimate hatriot bad grammar is just different than people who are trolling with bad grammar to try to get into hatred mail. So I wish I had, Lewis, like a specific list of ways that you can discern whether we're dealing with a troll or with a hatriot in the email. I feel like just over the years and after getting tens of thousands of emails from the audience, you develop a little bit of a sixth sense. The filter is not perfect, obviously. It is a human filter, but I feel like I have a pretty good sense of that. You just know it when you see it.
Yeah. As far as YouTube comments go, I find that a troll is more likely to leave a very, very short comment, right? Something just inflammatory, very brief, no detail.
Okay.
And when it's a hatriot that will actually kind of get into an issue or a topic and opine for a bit. Also, if you're looking at a thread, I find that a troll most likely will not respond to replies.
They won't engage in any kind of dialogue.
There's less engagement.
Yeah.
Whereas a hatriot will have more long posts that seem very passionate, and that could occupy a lot of their time. And trolls really need to be posting on as many videos as possible.
Right. They can't waste time engaging back and forth with people. There's another option, and I don't really know what to call it. I think I call it people who are not really connected to reality. You've got your trolls, you've got your hatriots, but then I get people, this includes on Facebook, this includes even on Instagram. Some people will do this to me, and certainly via email. They will write an email saying, "Hey, David," as if it's just a casual email. And then it's followed by anywhere between 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 pages of stuff. There is no way. I mean, it's typically the rantings of a madman. It's conspiratorial in many ways. It's completely out of this world. I would never expect to write an 8-page letter to some other radio or TV host and expect that that's something they're going to sit there and read. And so I don't consider those trolls, and I also don't consider them hatriots. It's not always even negative stuff. Sometimes it is. But like the 4 to 10-page emails, it's not going to go too far, really.
Yeah, there is that third category.
Yeah.
And no doubt, we cannot make a 10-page hatriot mail.
Right.
Hatriot mail guy would not be happy reading that one off.
Nor can I read a 10-page email and then respond to it on the show. I mean, there's not much we can do with a 10-page email. Next question today is from Eamon. Eamon says, what book do you think gets too much credit? Well, the question is credit for what? I know that already many in our audience are thinking of a particular book called the Bible. And when we say credit for what,
we can add the Quran and the Torah to that category.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I think for many people, those are the most important books, and then for many people, those are the books that get too much credit in terms of being the foundations of civilization. And what frustrates me is the idea that people say, well, you need the Bible to have a moral foundation for society. Like, for example, thou shalt not steal. If we didn't have the 10 Commandments, we'd have no reason or anybody telling us not to steal. Well, no, the idea of theft and opining on theft predates the 10 Commandments and the Bible being written. So I think that sometimes religious texts, and in Western society, the Bible specifically, get too much credit for being necessary to establish just basic fundamentals of our day-to-day culture.
Mm-hmm. So what about fiction? What about works of fiction? And now there's one that I know many people in the audience are immediately thinking of right now, one we've discussed at length,
which is
Atlas Shrugged. Of course, there's a book that definitely received too much credit. And by credit, I think we're talking about accolades, good credit here, reverence.
Yeah.
Yes.
The thing about Atlas Shrugged is I don't know that it gets credit for being incredible literature. I think many people actually say it's not particularly well written. It's more for political purposes that it gets credit as being just an incredibly powerful and impactful thing. I have a policy now, and this might be a crazy policy to many people, but to me it's perfectly logical. Unless I've read a book, I won't say that I think it's good or bad or worthless or gets too much credit or whatever, because I've been very, very surprised many, many times where there were books that I really anticipated that I would just love, and I was underwhelmed, fiction books, and there were books where I assumed I would sort of not be entertained, and I was captivated. One example is Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment, where I said, I want to read it because it's apparently so incredible, but I'm expecting that I'm going to be bored. And maybe this is sort of my preconceived notions about 19th century Russian fiction. I don't really know. And for all 600 or 700 pages of it, or whatever it was in the edition that I had, It was captivating. It was compelling. The characters were amazed, and it completely turned around. And I thought, how could this book really be so important in terms of the history of literature? And I get it after reading it.
What about another one that that some people like to criticize called Catcher in the Rye?
Well, it's been many years since I read Catcher in the Rye. I think the last time I was probably like 18 or 19. At the time, I didn't find the story hugely compelling, but I recognized that the writing was very, very good, and it was an important book in that sense. But do I find the story endlessly fascinating? No. At
Okay.
least I didn't when I was 18.
I agree. I agree with you on that one. So maybe that one does get too much credit.
You know which book doesn't get enough credit? Donald Trump's The Art of the Deal. And what I mean by that is the actual writer of the book who really wrote it, it just was revealed that there was a ghostwriter on that book. That person is not getting the credit they deserve.
That's a shame, really. I should reread that one.
Yeah.
Actually, I never read it in the first place.
Yeah,
I'm just
right.
kidding.
Yeah. It's basically up there with the Rich Dad, Poor Dad books by this guy called Robert Kiyosaki, who frames himself as some incredible financial guru. And it's basically the pseudo-scammy Trump University type of stuff that he teaches and talks about. Rachel wrote in saying, you and others have criticized the Republican Party primary for becoming a reality show. What's actually bad about elections being reality shows? Well, my answer to that is very clear. What do we really learn about our world and about people through reality shows? Very, very little. Take, for example...
I disagree.
Well, hold on. Take, for example, the Kardashian show. Do you learn anything about those people? Or do you learn anything about those people during the days that are agreed upon to film things and the predetermined places, locations, and ways in which it will be filmed? Do you learn a lot about, I don't know, making business deals by watching Shark Tank? Or do you actually just learn how a television caricature of venture capitalist conversations are happening? I mean, we brought in some investors to the show, Lewis. Nothing about the process was anything like what's depicted in Shark Tank. So my argument for why the election becoming a reality show is bad would be it appeals to the wrong senses of flamboyance and sensationalism and distracts from sober and important explorations of what candidate would actually be best for the people and for the country.
Okay, but let me pose something to you.
Okay.
Look back on any number of previous Republican primaries, right?
2012, for example.
Sure. I mean, would you call any of those a reality show, or by comparison, compared to this one? I mean, would you call them equal, mild, or more legitimate?
I think that the entire Trump candidacy has been the biggest reality show. And by that, I mean a guy who ran a campaign for months and months, just basically trying to use zingers and insults without actually discussing policy, which should be what is actually going to make people determine who they want to vote for. Turning the debates into basically sideshows and arguments with reporters and ridiculing who's next to you and talking about Trump's penis size and whatever the case may be. That, to me, is the epitome of the reality show, sensationalism and lack of substance.
But we know that political engagement in the U.S. is very low.
Okay.
Now, if all of this sensationalist garbage is actually getting people to pay attention to politics, and people
Right.
are becoming more politically engaged because of it, although it's not as substantive as we want it to be, is that a good thing?
Well, the question is, what is bad about elections becoming reality shows? You could be making the argument that aside from all the things I've identified as bad, none of which you've refuted, right?
Right.
You could be saying there is also a positive thing, which is making the election process more sensationalistic and entertaining might, we don't know yet, Republican primary had a high voter turnout, might increase voter turnout. And generally speaking, higher voter turnout is good. That's an argument you can make. But the question is, what is bad about the election being a reality show?
Yes. Well, not getting into any important topic, not getting into the meat of things, and just not having substantive discussions.
The other thing I am concerned about is when people see Trump run and they see how he talks about issues and they see how he talks to other people, you might be conditioning younger individuals to think that that's a legitimate way of doing diplomacy and discussing politics, and saying it's totally reasonable to, rather than really dig into issues and think through problems, what politics is grandstanding, talking points, insults, and shenanigans of this type. And this could have a really big trickle-down effect where future politicians think that this is a reasonable way to do politics. And the problem is that in many countries, Trump is a joke. Trump is a charlatan, and his entire demeanor is not going to be taken seriously. That's not going to be good for the United States. And I don't think it's good for people to see the Trump MO, right, and be tricked into thinking, oh, that's a reasonable way of engaging on political issues and with leaders.
Well, look, Donald Trump is very used to being on camera, and he's been on camera nonstop for quite some time. Let's just hope that if he does become president, he's a different person when the cameras are not rolling.
I'm out of time. The bonus show today is incredible. Sign up for instant access at davidpakman.com/membership.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.